Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for getting up and coming in this morning. I hope you all enjoyed yesterday evening. We have asked Roger Moore to talk this morning because we knew that he would inspire you all to come along first thing in the morning. I was trying to think about how does one introduce Roger Moore. When we decided we were running UK Speech here, asking Roger to talk was one of the first things we did. I know there is an ethos in UK Speech about getting new faces and new talent in, but every now and again it's really good to get someone. No, I was not. He said old. I did not use the word old. I was going to say that it's just really good to get somebody who just has that experience and insight to talk. And I was talking to one of the technicians on my team, and he was saying, "Oh, you know, who's doing the talks?" And he doesn't work in speech. I said, "Oh, you know, Roger Moore is doing the talk this morning." And he said, "Oh, you know, it's hardly the Roger Moore." And I said, "Well, if you work in speech processing, he is." So, Roger Moore.
Thank you, Naomi. Well, good morning, everybody. And again, I appreciate that you've all made an effort to get up this morning. Thank you so much. That's very, very good of you, especially after the wonderful event last night, which I'm sure everybody enjoyed. But I particularly like to thank Naomi, who indeed contacted me quite some time ago when I was less resistant, and asked if I'd do this, and I was of course very happy to. So it's a real honour to be able to talk to you this morning. So you've seen the title, and hopefully you've seen the abstract. Actually, that abstract took me a long time. It was a lot longer, but I eventually whittled it down to the essence. So you'll see where we're going to go. So spoken language processing, I'm going to cover lots of different areas and fairly superficially, but I want to give you just a flavour of how I see things just at the moment, and asking this key question, are we nearly there yet? Well, for those of us who've been around a while, of course we have seen the most dramatic changes over the years, and you know, this is not going back into prehistory, it's only going back tens of years. You know, in the early days for speech recognition systems or even speech synthesis, they were very, very simple command and control systems, mainly in the military. And then, of course, in the 90s, we had some significant steps forward in dictation systems. 97, when naturally speaking appeared, kind of shook everybody to see that appear in the marketplace. Finally, a continuous speech recognizer. Of course, we all had them in the labs, but you know, very few people thought that would hit the market at any time soon. IVR systems, of course, have been around for quite a while now, and that's probably the first occasion where members of the general public start to make contact with our kind of technology and realize that some things to do with the voice can be automated. And then again, we had another kind of shock to everybody, except those in the know, when Siri appeared, 2011. Suddenly, we've got a facility on pretty much everybody's phone. Opening up the gateway to location-based services and all kinds of wonderful integration of lots of things coming together and giving a voice access through a voice-enabled personal assistant. So that's roughly where we are right now, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. And where things are sort of going, people are talking about ECHAs, embodied conversational agents, so not just having a voice interface, but a personal assistant with personality, possibly on-screen avatars, which will be able to do more than just answer a query, but engage in productive interaction, conversational interaction. And then ultimately, where this all seems to be heading is what people call autonomous social agents, or to put it more simply, robots. And we're already seeing a lot of this beginning to start in the laboratories, in your laboratories, all over the place. So, are we nearly there? When I started this talk, I came across this really neat video. So, see what you make of this.
Kids, you'll like this. Sat nav, are we nearly there yet?
No.
Wow.
Impressive.
Can you be a little more specific, Sat nav?
Yes. No, we are not nearly there yet.
Sat-nav, are we nearly there yet? Did the sat-nav just sigh at me?
Sat nav, are we nearly there yet.
We are almost 1 meter nearer than when you
You've updated it wrong. You must have uploaded a sarcasm program or something.
Why would that even be an option?
I don't know, but something's happened.
Pack it in, the both of you, or turn the car around.
Satnav, where's the nearest toilet en route? Doing it again!
Now, there are people here working on some of those things, right? And so we can anticipate this might be a possible future, and a lot of what we need for that is pretty much in place. So maybe that's where we're going to end up. And of course, the last few years have just been tremendous in terms of apparent breakthroughs and people. We've got the word speech recognition, we've got word error rate wars going on, people fighting it out. Just how low can you get? Google speech synthesis, absolutely staggering. I don't know if you've all heard the latest synthesis from Google, Tachytron 2. I've got a couple of examples here. So this is the latest form of deep learning-based end-to-end speech synthesis.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Does the quick brown fox jump over the lazy dog? Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. How many pickled peppers did Peter Piper pick? She sells seashells on the seashore. The shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure.
Now, this is speech synthesis, and those of us who have been around for a while can remember sitting in meetings and hearing stuff coming out of loudspeakers and think, is that speech? You know, we have come a long way. This is absolutely amazing. The next example, also from Tachytron 2, is real and synthesized, one after the other, same utterances.
George Washington was the first president of the United States. George Washington was the first president of the United States. I'm too busy for romance. I'm too busy for romance.
So I'm not going to get you to vote on which is which, but I mean, it's pretty hard to tell, isn't it? Absolutely amazing. So, and then of course we've had this absolute revolution in the home. All these wonderful loudspeakers have started to appear, and they're all giving us access to information using our voice. Amazon particularly coming from almost nowhere and getting there first. And so the world is suddenly populated with these voice-enabled agents. All the things that some of us here were talking about for years actually has happened. It's in people's homes right now. Only a couple of weeks ago, we also saw an amazing demonstration of machine learning-based dialogue. This is the Google duplex system. I don't know how many heard all this. Sparked a little bit of controversy in terms of whether this was an ethical thing to do, to phone people up and not declare that you are a machine. But if you haven't heard this, this is the kind of dialogues that appear to be possible, although we don't know too much about the inner workings right yet. It's not been published.
Good evening.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, I'd like to reserve a table for Friday the 3rd.
Okay, hold on one moment.
Mm-hmm.
The male voice is the machine,
Okay.
just in case you know what.
Hold on one second.
Mm-hmm.
So Friday, November 3rd. How many people?
For 2 people.
2 people?
Yeah.
What time?
At 5 p.m.
Okay. And your name?
The first name is Daniel. That's Daniel.
Okay. You're all set.
Okay, great. Thanks.
We'll see you next Friday. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Well, that's pretty
Goodbye.
Good. Pretty good. I mean, absolutely amazing in terms of dialogue. If you could hear the ums and ahs and some lengthenings, making it all seem quite natural. And the person at the other end dealing with that inquiry apparently had absolutely no idea. There's another example that they published, again, this time the machine's the female voice, the first female voice.
So how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd.
Sure, give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, what time are you looking for around?
At 12 p.m.
We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15.
Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.?
Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for?
Just a woman's haircut for now.
Okay, we have at 10 o'clock.
10 a.m. is fine.
Okay, what's her first name?
The first name is Lisa.
Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Have a great day. Bye.
It's kind of boring really listening to that, isn't it? Because it just sounds like an ordinary everyday conversation that you might have with a service provider. But one of those participants was a machine. So we've really come an amazing long way. The statistics on current usage is also incredible. Tens of millions of Alexa sold over last Christmas. Google Assistant available 225 brands, more than 1,500 devices. Siri, 41 million monthly active users in the US. This is staggering, absolutely staggering. So looking to the future a bit, Gartner like to make projections, of course, market projections. Chatbots will power 85% of all customer service by the year 2020. Well, that's only 2 years away. And they also go on to say, and the average person will spend more conversations with bots than their spouse. Absolutely amazing. So, I think we're done, right? That's fine. Well done, everybody. That's very, very good. Thank you. That's it. Okay, good. Thank you for the one person who tried to clap. No, we're not done, are we? We can't really be done, surely. I mean, those are incredibly impressive, but have we really sorted this all out? I don't think so. Let's have a look. Okay, we've got a lot of issues, interesting issues, that we still have to grapple with for ubiquitous, real usage out there in the real world. This one particularly, a nice one. So any non-natives here, Brummie means a person from Birmingham. And people who are trying to deploy in serious applications where errors really matter are finding there are issues. The required levels of performance depend on the application, and some applications require very, very high levels of performance. So then we look at things like these fantastic error rates that have been claimed, but look at this, do a fantastic job of transcribing, but don't understand anything really. So we've got an interesting situation now where we have some amazing technology, but do we have everything that's required to satisfy the kinds of demands that the market would like? So there's another little video, you may have seen this already, if not. So what if HAL 9000 was Alexa?
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Searching for cod recipes online.
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Sorry, I can't find anyone named Rod K. More in your contacts.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
Sorry, I'm having trouble processing your request.
What's the problem?
Problem Child is a 1990 comedy movie starring Michael Oliver.
What are you talking about, Hal?
Playing Talking Heads on Spotify.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
Here are a few popular halal restaurants. Big Al's Pizzeria, Fatima's Halal Meat Market and Grill, Cedar's Halal Meat Market and Grill, and Old One
Where the
Eye
hell did you get that idea, Hal?
Searching for flights to Idaho.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Playing the Doors on Spotify.
Hal? Hal?
You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar.
Hal?
Okay, so, I mean, obviously it's just fabricated, but it is some indication now, a lot of people are having this kind of experience. They're now coming across this technology, they have certain expectations of what might be possible, and then they find themselves in this kind of muddy middle ground where things aren't quite going to plan. And that's not surprising, because if we look at the way that technology develops, then there's this sort of classic curve here, what's called the hype cycle. where we've got, you know, a new technology appears on the left here, the innovation trigger. We've got the peak of inflated expectations leading to the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then finally we get to the plateau of productivity. And lots of technologies have been shown to go through this kind of thing. So the writing is quite small, but in fact, even I can't see it. That's virtual assistance is apparently, according to Gartner, sitting up here, right at almost at the peak of inflated expectations. So the whole market is expecting way beyond perhaps what the technology, what you guys can actually deliver. And also we've got conversational user interfaces just lagging a little bit behind. So we've, according to this, yet to get to the peak of inflated expectations for what conversational interfaces can do. So that's kind of interesting, because there's obviously a long way to go before we end up over here where things are actually stabilized in the marketplace and delivering what you expect. Okay, so a little bit of audience participation, since we probably need waking up a little bit this morning. I thought it'd be interesting, I often do this, but I want to do it slightly differently today, because I just interested, how many people actually have Alexa or Google Home or one of those devices, clever speakers? Oh, lots. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And how many of you have actually used it? Most of you, brilliant, that's really, really good. And how many of you had such a fantastic experience that you basically use it every day now? Oh, well, congratulations to you, 3 or 4. Yes, okay, so I mean, I can see people who are halfway, not quite sure. A lot of this technology, like a lot of new technology, we get very excited, you know, people buy it because it has attractive apparent features, they try it out, and then they never use it again, you know. Siri was the side. The reason I did that for Alexa is I've done that in the past for Siri, and you have a very, very similar story. And in fact, these are some results that a student of mine did, a much wider survey, a more general user population, and it's essentially the same thing. That you know, you have some dedicated, it's not like there are no users. There are some dedicated users, and they typically find a really niche single thing to do. You know, I for example have Alexa at home, and I basically use it to access the radio, hands-free. I don't use it for anything else. And I, you know, talking to people, that's kind of what these things are used for. There's one, so it's basically a voice button pressing thing that you have. This is not a conversational interface. We seem to be away from that. But a lot of people find great value from that, and others use it less frequently. But most, you know, a lot of people try it once, and some people never try it, even though they might own it. So that relates to personal assistants on the telephone. So there's a lot of issues here. Why might this be? Obviously, as we've seen, the technology is improving fantastically, but we still have a bunch of pretty obvious issues which have been around forever and will probably continue to be so. So we know that trying to use speech technology, voice technology in a real environment has many, many challenges with competing sounds, noises, other people talking. The sort of places that you want to get advice on travel might be in a noisy railway station. You know, these are real world constraints. Different accents, as we see these, we haven't made huge inroads into understanding and the sort of higher level interpretation of what people are saying. There are privacy issues, not just where the data is streaming, but actually, you know, rather than just privately typing your request, you're actually speaking it out loud in public, and people can overhear what you're doing. A lot of people these have come from this survey, by the way. These are what people have cited as reasons they are in this bracket. And there are alternative ways to do things. We must never forget that using your voice, you know, why do you use your voice? Why does anybody speak? You know, there are certain advantages, but it's not a ubiquitous, not a universal solution. There are many perfectly adequate ways of interacting with information and technology. You know, swiping a screen is brilliant, very high information rate way of navigating around this display. Why would you want to use your voice at all? And not knowing what to do. A lot of people are put in a strange position with this technology, but they are told, okay, you can speak to it, but yeah, but what do I say? Now these are indeed very old issues. I can't remember the year this was published, but many of you probably have seen this book going back quite a few years now, Nass and Brave. And so we're still sort of some elements of this, that these voice interfaces are still creating a bit of suspicion. People aren't absolutely sure about them. So it's kind of interesting, which also reminds me of this work here, which Mike Phillips, who some of you may remember from a while ago, published, which is the relationship that he felt between usability of a voice-based system and the flexibility of a voice-based system. And so what he was positing was that, very structured dialogue, something very, very simple, which a user would have to learn, is sitting down here. It's not very flexible. It's not, you can only do a limited number of things with it, so the usability is low, as opposed to conversational interaction with a human being, which is kind of very, very flexible, very usable. There's, a million things that you can do through interacting with a person using language. And so he was speculating that the appearance of adding natural language and dialogue, these virtual personal agents like Siri, basically take you up this curve on your way up here. So, research is bringing us along this curve. So that's obviously 2011, so where are we just at the moment? Somewhere on this trajectory. But actually, this is Mike's suggestion. The trajectory actually appears to be something like this, that once you start to add this complexity, which seems to be a sort of a natural thing, because we appreciate that speech is, is part of language, and language is part of cognition, and so there's an immense complexity which we have to bring in. And once we start to bring in elements of that, yes, it may be more flexible, but our poor users suddenly don't know how to engage, because they're not dealing with a human being with all the expectations and knowledge and priors. They're dealing with a machine of some kind. And there is an issue. Now that curve is very familiar. That's a very familiar curve to any roboticist, because that looks exactly like the famous uncanny valley curve in robotics, which is what you find when you make a robot which at one end here is machine-like, and at this end here is human-like, and then we've got an axis here of usability, familiarity, if you like. And as you make a robot more and more human, you get to a point where it actually is quite creepy. It's rather scary, and we get this same dip here, which is called the uncanny valley. People don't know how to interact with this thing, because now it is looking a bit like a human, but is not a human. Quite happy with a machine, something that's clearly machine back here, but when we're in this region, that's an issue. So it's the same story. So we can label that, if you like, a kind of habitability gap. This is a UX term. If you're going to be interfacing or interacting, then habitability, can a user occupy the space of possibilities in an adequate way, and there appears to be an interesting issue here. So, right. So I'm just going to labour that point, which is to just remind everybody that we are dealing with spoken language here. This is a human behaviour which is evolved for interaction between human beings, and it involves a very large number of complex and difficult concepts, which appears to be necessary to engage linguistically with another member of our species. So this is a definition of language. There are many definitions. This is a definition I quite like from Tom Scott Phillips, which is that language is essentially an ostensive, inferential, recursive mind reading. So each word here is obviously really important. Ostensive means that you are actually, you have to actually engage with a partner when you are languaging, is the terminology that's used. Until we saw, the blue lights on Alexa actually looking at you, we didn't really have any speech systems which had that notion of positive engagement. But we still have not, lots of people in robotics don't understand this. If a robot needs to, if it's going to engage with a person, it's got to look at them, it's got to indicate that it's listening to them. There are all kinds of issues here in just handling that notion of directed interaction between individuals. Inferential, probably we're happy with that. Recursive mind reading. Now, this is seems to be absolutely critical to language, that the reason that people are capable of this very high information rate interaction using such a sort of low information rate channel is precisely because of all the priors and the layered priors that we have in terms of our understanding of each other. I can talk to you because you are another human being. You're not some alien. You have a background. You have evolved. You know, your upbringing is the same as mine. In broad terms, your view of the world is somewhat aligned to mine at many levels. And it's that which facilitates this amazing acoustic signaling system and gives the shape to that system. Okay, so I've captured that in these kind of weird diagrams, which I'm not going to explain, but if you're interested, you can look them up. So that's kind of what it is for humans to engage in language-based interaction with each other, as opposed to what we have when we stick a machine, albeit a cognitive machine, which is what that signifies. Sorry, maybe I should just add one thing here. So what this is signifying is that these are two individuals. I should say at least this. These are two individuals. This individual on the left has a mental representation. I know that's controversial. Has some kind of representation of this individual in his or her context, but also has a representation of what's in the mind of this individual in terms of their representation of this individual, and vice versa. That's the recursive, and that's what conditions what comes out of people's mouths. As opposed to this, when we have a human and an agent, so we've got a poor old human here who's assuming, because they've been told this is going to be a conversational interface, or they're going to engage in language-based interaction with a device, is trying to model this device. It's just, they might assume that the device has a model of them, but it doesn't, and so on. So the recursion is broken down. We've got a very one-sided, lopsided relationship. In fact, the main thing we can say right now is that we know pretty much how to do inference over here, but we have nothing in these. A little bit over here, nothing much over here to speak of. That's not to say people aren't working on this. Of course they are, and many of you are. But this is what we need to bring together. We need to really understand this and put this into some logical form for technology. Now, that sounds great, and that points us in a direction, but I also want to raise a little flag of warning here that, of course, we will never have machines which have the same situated and embodied prior experiences as a human being. And so we may never be able to engage linguistically with a machine in a full form. Now that's just a hypothesis. We could test that, right? But it's something to be concerned about. There is an essential mismatch between the human being and the agent as constructed artificially, which is not superficial. That is a deep mismatch. Okay, right. So that's my little soapbox. Jumping back then to some of the challenges that we need to grapple with if we're going to tackle some of these important questions and come up with technologies which really are going to be valuable to users. So here's a bunch of things which, if you're interested, you can read about in this book. It's a chapter in this book fairly recently. And some of these are very, very obvious, right? We need to make sure that we are acknowledging that speech, spoken language, often does not exist on its own. The only place it really exists on its own is on a telephone, and we all know that is can be a difficult communication between people precisely because it is only audio. In real interactions, everyday interactions, we are using gesture, we're using eye gaze, we're using body posture. All of this information is somehow beautifully integrated, and behaviors are generated and interpreted in appropriate ways. So multimodal context in which speech occurs is really, really important, and we need more research to try to get into that. Again, I say these are kind of obvious. Lots of effort over the years in word recognition, building speech recognizers can produce transcript with a very high accuracy. But, of course, there's more to speech than just the words. We really have to get to grips with understanding, with meanings, with the flow, the shapes that the words are embedded in, the prosody, and the notion that all linguistic interaction takes place in a situated and grounded context. And there's lots of evidence that language and speech is shaped by that. We choose our words specifically for the context that we are using them in. And we are relying on the fact that we are in a particular situation and that we have certain grounded concepts. There's a whole set of theories about meaning relating to metaphor, which ultimately ground everything in the physical world, which are really, really interesting. And people are looking at these, but, we're not making a huge headway, but we need to. And then just getting meaning, that's not a sort of universal panacea either. We've got to go beyond just meaning. It's not just what somebody's meaning, it's what they're trying to do. What are the intentions? What's behind? Why are they speaking at all? What are the needs of the individual? Because if we're providing a service, then the service should be to service the needs. It's not about recognizing the speech. It's about servicing the needs of the interlocutor. So what is it that drives people, and what are their intentions? And we have individuality, we have expressivity, and as you know, we had Bjorn Schuller a couple of years ago, didn't we? Give us a keynote. Lots of work going on in this paralinguistics. But a lot of people treat paralinguistics like, oh, that's a nice thing, we'll have it on the side, but maybe we don't need to worry about it. It's actually part of the core. This is the essence. It's not just some nice overlay. This is part of the communicative context in which people interact. And so we need to understand that, model it, and create simulations of it. There's also an assumption that spoken language is just about communication. I'm just going to give you a fact and that's it, or ask a question. But it's much more than that. Spoken language is this amazing, coupled, coordinated behavior between individuals. It was interesting yesterday in the talk on turn-taking that the discussion afterwards, there were turns, but the overlaps were phenomenal. The individuals in that discussion were essentially coordinating their behavior in an interesting way. And that's part of the essence of what was going on. And it wasn't that they were violating the tone constraints, they were actively coupled as individuals and therefore genuinely, I was going to say communicating, but that's not what I'm trying to say. That takes us beyond dialogue, where we've got to think about this whole idea of theory of mind. What does it mean to say that another individual has a perspective on us? And how does that influence our behavior? And how do we model that? And how do we consider that in relation to the kinds of technologies that we're interested in? And finally, this is just, this is not an extensive list, this is just a list. The notion that a lot of interaction, especially between people, relies upon a significant amount of history. You come to this meeting, you meet a friend, and you pretty much pick up some conversation that you finished last year, or that was interrupted last year. We have significant memory. We have significant histories of how interactions go. And so it would seem unreasonable for Alexa to have no idea that the last thing you did was whatever it was. Now, these things are coming, but I just want to underline how important it is, how in natural spoken language interaction, we take this kind of thing for granted. So we need to be aware of this. This was an interesting one. Many of you know that I published a paper a while ago, seems to be quite popular, on how much data we need to train systems. And I predicted that we needed the most phenomenal amount of data. I'm not going to re-give that lecture. But I was looking back at it when I was preparing this, and I noticed in the conclusions I pointed out that the point of this paper is to show that the amounts of data required to reach human levels of performance is absolutely ridiculous. Many, many lifetimes worth of speech exposure. So the paradigm at the time, in other words, is more like evolving a solution rather than bringing up a child. But I did note in the conclusion that we needed another paradigm. We needed to be on another curve, essentially, where we were more data efficient. Now, at the time, I have to admit, I thought, well, okay, but that's crazy. You know, H&Ms are brilliant. What else do we need? And I could not imagine at the time that we might be doing something different today. But of course we are. We are in a whole new world. Now, for those who have been around a while, it's not a whole new world, of course. Some of us were doing this back in the 1990s. It's just that it's taken a long gestation period for these techniques to actually be able to work, and a lot of that has come from the fact that we now have phenomenal amounts of data. We do have phenomenal amounts of data. And that seems to be the secret to getting this stuff going. And of course, it's absolutely revolutionizing just about every aspect of what we do. And you can see that in almost everybody's paper at this meeting. But beware, if you've not looked at this too closely, you might want to just take a quick read of Gary Marcus's critical appraisal, published, it's only available on archive at the moment, but just published recently. You know, deep learning, fantastic, but there are some really interesting issues. And what's interesting to me about this critique is that a lot of the problems with deep learning that he cites, he gives examples of the kinds of things it can't do, and most of them are to do with language and speech, which is interesting. Because, if I don't say this later, we as a community are sitting on possibly the hardest problem that we know. It's absolutely, you know, we're really lucky to be working in this area. So there's a lot of issues here. I'm not going to spend time, in fact I can't spend time going through them, but have a read of this paper if you just want to be you know, a little bit inspired by how we might be taking these new techniques to the next level, some of the things that we really need to address. Because after all, you know, right now, deep learning, what is it? It's just a massive nonlinear transformation. And it turns out that we were making horrible assumptions, or that we can now throw away. That's basically what we've done, isn't it? These end-to-end systems are just throwing away some crude approximations and replacing them with stuff we can train, which is great. But that, you know, isn't addressing a lot of the big issues that I was talking about earlier. But it's a tool, and it's a tool we can use really powerfully. Okay, one of the things I forgot to say at the beginning is that when Naomi asked me, I had just come back from giving a shorter version of this talk to the ESAT group in Leuven, who asked me to talk on this exact topic. And I thought, so a couple of the slides have come through from that. And one of the things that they were wanting me to talk about is, yeah, but, you know, the landscape of research is changing dramatically. And I don't know if you've heard this FAMGA acronym, which actually, I actually have a little bit of training in phonetics, so I would call it FAGMA. That's much easier to pronounce. But anyway, FAMGA is what it's called. So these big guys, some of whom are here, you know, it's changed the whole research landscape, hasn't it? It's completely changed things. Lots of stuff is now available freely, off the shelf, core components. I mean, how many people here working on speech recognition have had to advise somebody who wants a speech recognizer, well, you can't really use our stuff, but you can go and just take Google, that'll be fine. So, you know, in some sense, some people, you know, in academics are kind of drifting into being almost service providers, and this is typical now in sort of European projects where you might have some sort of application in the speech tech lab wanting to do speech research is actually ending up just servicing some standard off-the-shelf provision. And of course, the companies are actually doing research. So they have significant resources. They have people, they have the data, and of course that's the key. They have the data, and everything right now is dependent on the data. But of course, academia, we supply the people in the end, so we do have a role. So what other roles might academia play, as well as just training people? Well, there are a lot of problems which can't be solved just using more data. Data sparse problems. So unusual environments, unusual users, unusual applications, where we need to do some sort of transfer learning, or we need some means for extrapolating or interpolating from known solutions into new areas. This is still really important and can be done without the huge amounts of data that some of the industrial research labs have access to. Priors. It's just one simple little word, but I've tried to set the scene and indicate the importance of priors to, to the whole essence of spoken language interaction. And those priors are not going to come from the data. The priors come from somewhere else. They come from some knowledge or some understanding or some hypothesis or some theory about the ways things should be structured. And so we can really start to think about what do we mean by this? How do we integrate appropriate priors into, not replacing the machine learning approach, but to integrate properly priors into the machine learning approach. Academia, of course, can do proof of principle, showing things that might be possible on a small scale, rather than full-blown implementations, trying out very risky things. Now, here's an odd one. I made a joke about this 2 years ago. Said, maybe we're going to, academics are going to end up just looking at actual implemented speech systems, trying to figure out how they work. What's going on inside the cloud, what's going on in these LSTM configurations, and turning it back into a kind of science. And I meant that as a kind of joke, a sort of engineering-based psychoanalysis of the systems or something. And then I saw a paper, somebody's actually doing exactly that. And maybe there are more now, I've been tracking it. But that seems a very odd thing. But anyway, why not? Maybe we can learn something. I feel very strongly about this one because one of the trends that I've seen over the years is because of the whole machine learning approach, even with HMMs, it is very de-skilling. And although I was one of the champions of standard data sets and common evaluations, that is de-skilling. It means that you end up with people who have perhaps never listened to a speech signal, never looked at the data in detail, and they are confident that they have no need to have any understanding of the underlying principles of what they're looking at. It is a pattern recognition problem. Give me the data, I will come up with some solution. And maybe we can reskill a little bit and make sure that people in the community have some background in the essence of what spoken language is actually all about, in order to inform those future solutions which will take us to the next level of what's possible. And then, of course, the obvious one is bespoke application areas, niche markets. My lab and Phil Green and what have you specialize in clinical applications because they're just not, it's not a serious market for players, for the big guys, the FAMGers. And so, this is a place where people can make a valuable contribution. And the final point here is that not all applications are real-time and interactive. So I've really been stressing that and talking about robots and interaction and conversation, but a lot of applications are not in that area. And so this is a diagram I like to use. Don't worry about it too much. There's lots of words here. I'm going to take you around it quickly. But if we look at, we've got two major axes here, or three if you like. We've got real-time real-time systems. Start again. Right. Up here, the vertical axis is real-time and non-real-time processing. The horizontal axis is interactive systems versus non-interactive systems. Okay? The colors here signify, in the middle we've got things which are kind of easy, we know how to do, and as we get near the edge, we've got things which are kind of harder, which are challenging. The difference between the black type and the red type is that the black type are sort of underlying technology, and the red type are application areas. Okay, so quite a lot of information packed into one simple picture. But what I want to point out is that real-time interactive systems of the type that I've mainly been talking about are only one quadrant in this big picture. They're up here, right? The benefits are exploiting the voice channel when hands and eyes are busy, which is why I'm still staggered that we don't see much in cars, by the way. I know it's a challenging environment, but that's a place where there's a real benefit to using voice. So that's just one quadrant, whereas we have these other areas, right? So we have interactive but non-real time. Lots of stuff is very basic here, but work on special effects in voice, all kinds of things which I know people are dabbling in. They're sitting down here. Top left-hand corner is, excuse me, non-interactive but real time. So this is where monitoring, surveillance, a lot of speaker recognition, maybe stuff is sitting up in that corner, and then in the bottom left we've got the data mining area, which is non-real time, non-interactive. We make a query and we get information back. So I just wanted to show you that there's a way of just breaking up the whole space here to make it a bit more manageable and to understand what's required in the different places. Okay, so try and wind up now. So are we nearly there yet? Well, I guess you've got a bit of a hint from what I've been saying so far. So apologies if you've seen me say this before, but of course it's very hard to predict, and especially very hard to predict the future, and that's a famous saying by Niels Bohr. But that shouldn't stop us. Let's try it anyway. So over the years, I've actually attempted to make predictions, and usually based on surveys, and probably many of you here have participated, so thank you very much. You're about to see your data. As just a way of kind of gauging where we are and how things are going. Now, the one that you're all thinking about, who know about this stuff, is coming in a moment, but I was also reminded, and I'd forgotten, that I did this one back in '94, 20 things we still don't know about speech. And I realized that next year will be 25 years since I did this. So I'm just suddenly thinking, so don't be surprised if you get an email. Because what this paper did was it listed a bunch of things that we may or may not have known in '94, so 24 years ago, and then people ranked them in terms of what they thought their importance. And so I looked it up, and so this is interesting to kind of look back. So this is number, in fact I'm now biasing my responses, I realise I shouldn't show you this at all. So number one, what a suitable level of representation. What is a suitable, okay, should be a plural there. What are suitable levels of representation? That's a big issue back in the 90s. Have we solved that? Is that all sorted out now? Have we just delegated that to machine learning? Or what about these priors that I keep talking about? What are the mechanisms for learning? Was seen as a very important notion back then. Is it still now? What are the units? That's an interesting one. Everybody in those days was talking about the units on the assumption that there's all these nuggets that we ought to be capturing and working with. That maybe, has that gone away? Have we basically sidestepped that with a more sophisticated view now of patterning and structure? Maybe we have. Time frame. What about time frame based speech processing? Should we be, at the time, should we be looking over longer time scales rather than just chopping things up on a 30 millisecond basis? Adaptation. To what extent is a system constantly making minor adjustments as opposed to being trained and then fixed? Or, as we know, living systems, human beings, constantly making minor adjustments to our representations and models. How important is the physiology? I had a conversation last night about the ear. Big debates back then. Has that all gone away? There are still people doing auditory modeling. There are still people looking at the speech production process, but does that have any impact on the technology? Are these also somehow the priors that we might be interested in? That's an interesting one, given what I just said about a moment ago about humans and machines. Is human-human relevant to human-machine interaction? How important is the communicative nature of speech? That, to me, I would rank that as kind of number one, because we are in, this is a bit of an aside, but I can take one extra minute. We are in real danger, I think, in the speech community of losing grip of the essence of speech itself, and the fact that it is a carefully crafted and tailored signal on a sort of millisecond basis, precisely for the purposes of communicative interaction. And those choices are being made actively and dynamically, and our recognizers need to know that, and our synthesizers need to exhibit that. What's it good for? It's not a ubiquitous solution to the human interface, as a point I made earlier, right? When do we want vocal interaction with artificial agents? Do we want to speak to robots? Can we speak to robots? And what is a good architecture? So that's just a dip back in the past, right? That's a bit of history, but I thought it was sort of interesting in the context of what I'm talking about, to have a quick reminder of things that were hot topics 25 years ago, which were open questions then, and to ask ourselves, are they either relevant anymore, or are they solved? Or maybe they are relevant and not solved, which could be interesting. There's 20. I've just given you the top 10 in terms of the people's ranking. I also, as I was rummaging around, I came across this, which was 2001, I think. Yes, 2001, a Eurospeech. I did a quick survey. You probably can't read this. Will ASR ever consistently outperform human listeners? Now, given the word error rate wars that we've seen in the last couple of years, it's interesting. But the majority of people here said no. And a lot of people, those who said yes, had to put a year on it. We had 20 to 25 years out, and a lot of people saying, well, it's a long way out. That's interesting in the context of where we are right now. But of course, we could have a big debate about those error rates and whether they reflect the reality of what we're really interested in. However, this is the big one. So some of you know about this already. I conducted a survey at the ASRU, Automatic Speech Recognition and Understanding Workshop, in '97. And this survey, a lot of surveys just ask people for their opinions about what's going to happen in 20 years. This survey was different because it listed a bunch of things that might happen and asked them to put a date on it, very much like that, which means you get numeric results and you can compute means and things. It's kind of interesting. So that was done in '97. What was very interesting at the time is everything. I'm not going to give those results explicitly, but just to remind those who know about this, the results were very, very negative in '97. A lot of people thought that we were up against very hard problems. A lot of the solutions seemed to be out of reach. The technology was being used, but was found to be wanting, and people were getting a little concerned. So the responses were quite negative. We had a discussion which was recorded, which was very negative, and I was forbidden from publishing the results because it's an American meeting, and they didn't want DARPA to be reading all this negative stuff where people are saying, well, maybe we'll never crack this. So that's just a little bit of interesting context on the '97. Anyway, 6 years passed, and in 2003 I was asked, hey, why don't you do it again? That could be interesting to compare essentially the same community and the same questions. Originally there were 12, not questions, statements. Originally there were 12 statements. In 2003 there were added a few more because the landscape is slightly different. And you can see anyway, so it's happened 4 times now. The last one was in 2015. Each time there have been a few more statements added. So I thought, I very rarely have a chance to do this, so I thought today was a good opportunity. I'm actually going to go through the 2015 responses. There are 13 statements. I'll just very quickly go through, because normally I have to just give a quick overview, which is like this. But I thought it'd be interesting for you to actually see the individual statements, and then you can form your own opinions about all this. 2015, of course, is already 3 years ago. So we're halfway between. Now this is the overall statistic, which is what I usually do, and you can't take a lot from this, except if I do this. So the means, so this is when the survey was done in 97, and this was the mean, okay, or median. In 2003, this is 2003, this is the median, it was further away. People were thinking, it's a bit harder than we thought. In 2009, it was further away again. So the future was receding, which was interesting. Now, you could say this is harder than we thought. You could say people were being a bit more realistic. Or you could say it's statistically insignificant. But then in 2015, we're getting a bit of optimism creeping back. Yay. So thank goodness for that. But yes, so I'm obviously really looking forward to, when will the next one be? 21? Looking forward to redoing it then and seeing what, because I mean, there have been so many changes in these last 3 years. What's it going to be like in the next 3? Well, that's a very good way to lead into this. What will it be like in the next 3 years? So according to the survey, this is exactly what was going to happen. So now, right now, more than 50% of new PCs have dictation on them. So remember, these statements were just presented and you were asked, when's this going to happen? Okay, so a lot of these things were way in the future. They're now judged as happening now. Most telephone IVR systems accept speech input more than just digits. Now, in the next 2 years, all mobile devices have built-in speech recognition capability. Seems reasonable. Maybe they do already. 4 years, now is an interesting one. Voice recognition commonly available at home. That's obviously going to be affected dramatically by what's been happening. Very interesting to see. Also 4 years. Number of speech-enabled applications created with the mobile ecosystem reaches 1 million. Probably there. DNNs replace all of the major components in a spoken language technology system. Only 4 years out. Only 4 years out. TV closed captioning, automatic and pervasive, 5 years out. So this is from today. 7 years out, voice-enabled command and control in cars. Coming slower than I would wish, and you might be surprised, but of course getting technology into a vehicle, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome. It's not just the core technology, getting anything to a vehicle requires a lot of safety and testing and stuff. Also 7 years out. Majority of automatic speech recognition systems have completely abandoned HMMs. Can't quite see it. Yeah. I put a couple of green arrows here. This one is rapidly approaching us. That was way out in the future, not so many years ago, but this one is now coming at us very, very fast. Pocket-sized learning machines, commonly available for the hearing impaired. Most information and access and search using mobile phones done through speech recognition and synthesis. All these are 7 years out. Mobile phones used to control and monitor home appliances remotely using speech. It's possible now, but these are ubiquitous. Mobile speech applications generate 10 billion in revenue. I don't know the answer to that. Telephones are answered by an intelligent answering machine that converses with the calling party to determine the nature and priority of the call. But 9 years out. Interesting. As always with these things, you're interested to see, always want to know what the next survey, people's next view is. 12 years out, public proceedings, courts, public inquiries, parliament are transcribed automatically. European projects, of course, looking at doing exactly that. Also 12 years out, but coming at us quickly. Speech recognition actually equals that of the average human transcriber. Also 12 years out, yeah, engrams. Abandoning engrams. When these were originally stated, it was almost inconceivable that HMMs and engrams might be abandoned. Now, of course, it's perfectly reasonable. Automatic airline reservation by voice over the telephone is the norm. Receding into the future. and for very good reasons, right? We have perfectly good ways of doing this using conventional web. Why would you want to speak to a web browser? You just use the web browser, right? It's easy. 2 clicks and you've got a plane. Possible to hold a telephone conversation with an automatic chat line system for more than 10 minutes without realizing it isn't human. That's 12 years out, coming closer, but you know, in the context of the duplex system, interesting. Maybe that's not a good estimate. It will change. 17 years out, first legal case in which a recording of a person's voice is thrown out because it can't be proved whether a computer or a person said it. These are all, I think these are sort of historically interesting in terms of whether they may or may not be possible, and the fact that these were thought of a number of years ago. Translating telephones. Actually, some of these predictions came from Ray Kurzweil in terms of the statements in his books. I think that's one of them. 17 years out. Also 17 years out. Conversational interaction with autonomous social agents such as robots commonplace at home. 17 years out. That's interesting. Oh yes, okay. 3 slides from here. Okay, 22 years out. Most routine business transactions take place between a human and a virtual personality. That's coming closer very fast. Most multilingual people are the similar one, speech-to-speech translation, also coming closer. Most interaction in computing is through gestures, two-way natural language spoken communication, that's coming closer. Majority of text is created using continuous speech recognition, coming closer, but a long way out. That's a staggering one, isn't it? Considering the amount that was invested in that, and you know, Dragon, naturally speaking, appearing in the 90s. Spoken language technology can translate a voice from one language to another. Okay, that's very similar to the previous one. 43 years out, speech replaces text-based web search. That's amazing. This is the one you want. No more need for speech research. Okay, I'll make the joke. You know, some of you know what I'm going to say. We have means and medians for all this, and mins and maxes. Every time we do this survey, the minimum for this is in the 1980s. There are people in our community who think there's already been too much speech research, but they are at the end of a distribution. And then finally, never going to happen, a leading cause of time away from work is being hoarse from talking all the time, and people buy keyboards as an alternative. Okay, so if you want to know more about some of that stuff, it's on my webpage. In fact, I also keep a little, I don't know what you call it, but a record of significant events. So, you know, if something is announced, which I think is significant, it goes in here. That's sort of up to date, and if you have a significant event you want to see in there, you can send me an email about it. So, in conclusion, no, we're not there yet. You could argue we have a very, very long way to go, which is great. But we're definitely closer than we were yesterday. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, we did start late, so we are a little bit behind, but what we're going to do is blend the poster session with coffee and still start the oral session on time at 11:30. So we do have time for a few questions. So if we have any hands up, I can get a microphone to you.
Thank you, Roger. That was a great talk, raising lots of questions that I often ask myself. Is this on?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about, as a linguist, as a phonetician, it's got harder and harder to be involved with technology because all these statistically based methods don't want the kind of knowledge base that we're talking about. And I think when you mentioned that the core of speech is that you're communicating, looking at the paralinguistic, the interaction stuff, the emotional stuff, how it links to linguistic prosody, for example. Very few people are able to incorporate what comes out of that research into these DNN-based systems. So I feel that increasingly what students want to learn is how to operate CALDI, not how does speech work in the human.
Yeah.
So I really don't know whether there will be jobs for the likes of myself in a few years' time. I doubt it.
I think there is a real and deep-seated issue there, which I've actually spoken about in the past. And yeah, as you know, I've often wheeled out to argue for communities to talk to each other, and I long ago decided that's never going to work. I mean, what we need is we need to educate young students in all of these disciplines and make them aware of all these issues. And so we need new brains who can integrate, because if we just take the current sort of knowledge base and the practice base and just try and shove it together, I just think that, you know, as we have the evidence, right, it doesn't work. And we can have nice conversations, which is important, but I think we just got to have new people, young people, who can see across these disciplines. Now, that's probably not going to happen, but I think, you know, that could be really important for our field if we can make that happen somehow, and make sure that our courses don't only focus on the nitty-gritty engineering or don't only focus on the linguistics. Both sides, you know, both perspectives somehow have to be integrated in people who are capable of seeing across, straddling this divide somehow. It's a tough one.
Roger. I do so agree with what the questioner and you just said, but I wanted to switch to a very different kind of thing. You were when you talked about the state of the art, you could certainly argue that the Google duplex system was the real outlier of the extraordinary demonstration of a state of the art. The problem is that we know almost nothing about it. And in particular, people have pointed out that you say it's a system that, you know, the real thing, well, as far as I know, no hairdresser and no restaurant ever answers the phone saying, hello, can I help you, or good morning. I mean, they say where they are. Almost, yeah, are you going to answer? That's good. Can I just finish? Yeah. I'm glad. I mean, that's what I wanted to do, to provoke an answer. Yeah. And the other thing was, there's apparently no background noise, as some people have pointed out. And, you know, that's very rare for that kind of environment. So, I mean, because Google is so impressive, I mean, this is not knocking Google at all. I mean, they're incredibly impressive, and I could well believe that it's real. It's just that it worries me that we don't know enough about it to say this is the state of the art. So are we going to be told that it is real? And I'd like to hear.
Yeah. So there was a follow-up, because I think a lot of the press asked questions about that's not how they answer the phone, is that the full conversation? And the examples that were released were edited. The personal information of the restaurants involved was removed from the conversation.
Okay.
But the actual interaction wasn't edited. The interaction is actually real. I think it's probably fair to say that the dialogue processing and the language understanding is the best part of this, actually. The speech is a bit smoke and mirrors.
Oh, okay. Oh, really? Okay.
There is, I would argue that this isn't what I would call full text-to-speech synthesis.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Sorry,
I think. Yeah. Well, can I just want to make a comment that, you know, that is really exciting, isn't it? I mean, we see a demonstration like that, and we don't know, and that is sort of evidence for sort of one of my main arguments is we've got this shift from academia into the research labs of these companies, and because they're not playing necessarily in the same space. So we have to wait and see what scientific papers, if any, come out that actually describe what the general public and, you know, the press have already apparently seen evidence of. But we, as practitioners, do not know the details, and therefore have to remain skeptical until we actually see the published scientific work. So, very interesting situation. A novel one for us. That's why I love this field, right? A young field, seeing it transit through from some weird ideas, you know, offline stuff, and now actually really out there. It's so exciting.
Yeah. So this is going back to the 90s as well. There was this pro-work at Xerox PARC in the late 90s, where people envisage the idea of calm computing, this idea of technology sort of being in the background and facilitating everything and not getting in our way and making a life which was sort of like almost, imagine sort of like almost yogic sort of sublimity in some sense. And I guess it's more of an open question to what extent any of this technology is actually doing anything like that, or whether it ever will, in some sense.
Yeah, well, that's in the middle, right? I was raising my own little personal soapbox about whether we can interact seamlessly with a technology which is purporting to enter into language space. Okay, so I have some serious questions about that. I don't know if that's an answer to your.
I guess I'm more worrying about the usability in the end of technology as a whole.
Yeah.
So we're very focused in speech technology, which we're interested in. It's a hard problem. But when you put it in context of everything else, in terms of mobile phone and home technology and stuff like that, in terms of big picture, in what way is what we're doing making anything better? I guess.
Well, I mean, the benefits of speech, hands-free, eyes-free, fast. There are places where that really works. As I say, I use Alexa to switch on the radio. That's brilliant. If I'm doing something in the kitchen, it saves me a walk across the room and pressing a button. People do that sort of thing all the time. I mean, everybody here who has one probably is doing exactly the same thing. They have a niche application which they use, and they use it regularly because it really helps them, and it fits with the rest of their activities and what they're doing. I mean, another neat one for Siri that somebody told me about was this person only ever used Siri when he would left walk and he's walking along the street and he just says, "When's my next bus?" And it knows enough about him and where he is and the bus stop, and has access to timetables, and it just tells him when the next bus is. I mean, that's brilliant, right? But he's not having, it's not a chatbot, he's not having, he doesn't have a relationship with it. He's just using it as a tool, which would, and the alternative would be, goodness, I mean, crikey, how do you find a timetable online? It's terrible, isn't it? So Siri solved all that for him, and that's brilliant, but that's not spoken language, is it? That is using your voice.
I think that's a good place to stop. We've opened up a lot of issues which will hopefully come up over coffee, and I just want to thank Roger again. That was a great talk. Thank you.